They stood in a half circle around me like judges at a trial I'd never been invited to attend. My brother Richard had his arms crossed, his jaw set in that way he'd perfected since childhood, righteous, immovable, already convinced of his own correctness. My sister Margaret sat perched on the edge of Father's leather armchair, the one he'd forbidden anyone to sit in while he was alive, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were posing for a portrait of virtue. And there, by the window overlooking the garden Mother had tended for 40 years, stood Uncle Vincent, Father's younger brother, his face carefully arranged into an expression of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's time, Daniel," Richard said, his voice flat and final. "You need to leave." I looked at each of them in turn, searching for something, a flicker of doubt, a trace of the people I'd grown up with, shared Christmas mornings and summer vacations with, fought and laughed with. But their faces were masks, hardened by whatever story they'd convinced themselves was true. The house felt different now, 3 days after Father's funeral. The walls that had held our family's history for 60 years seemed to lean inward, pressing down with the weight of everything unsaid. "This is my home too," I said quietly, not pleading, just stating a fact that had been true for 38 years. Margaret's eyes flickered toward Uncle Vincent, then back to me. "Was your home," she corrected, her voice soft but sharp as a blade wrapped in silk. "The will was very clear, Daniel. Father left the estate to Richard and me. You were provided for separately, a trust fund. It's generous, really, considering..." Considering what? The words came out harder than I'd intended. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Through the window behind Uncle Vincent, I could see the oak tree Father had planted the year I was born. He'd told me once when I was 7 or 8 that he'd chosen an oak because they lived for centuries, because they stood strong through storms, because their roots went deep, like family, he'd said, his hand warm and heavy on my shoulder. "Considering you haven't been part of this family in any meaningful way for years," Richard said finally. "You left, Daniel. You chose your own path. Made it very clear you wanted nothing to do with the business, with our responsibilities here." Father understood that. He made arrangements accordingly. I felt something crack inside my chest, a sound like ice breaking on a winter lake. I moved to Portland for work. I called every week. I came home for every holiday, every birthday, When it was convenient, Margaret interrupted. When it fit your schedule. Do you know how many board meetings you missed? How many times Father asked for your input on estate decisions and you were too busy with your little nonprofit projects? Little nonprofit projects. The words hung in the air like smoke. For 12 years, I'd run a foundation that built community centers in underserved neighborhoods. We'd opened 17 facilities, created jobs for hundreds of people, gave kids safe places to go after school. Father had come to the opening of the first one, stood beside me cutting the ribbon, told me he was proud. I'd held on to that moment like a talisman through every difficult year that followed. He was proud of that work, I said, but even as I spoke, I heard the uncertainty in my own voice. Uncle Vincent finally moved from the window, his shoes clicking softly on the hardwood floor Father had insisted on restoring himself 20 years ago. "Your father was a complicated man, Daniel. He believed in legacy, in continuity. Richard has been running the company for the past 8 years. Margaret has managed the family properties, the investments, the charitable foundation here in town. They've been the ones holding things together. And I've been building something that mattered," I said. "Something that helped people who actually needed help. Not just what?" Richard's voice rose for the first time, color flooding his cheeks. "Not just the family that gave you everything, the name that opened doors for you, the education that cost $250,000. You took it all, Daniel, and then you left. You wanted to be noble, to be different, to prove you weren't just another privileged son living off his father's money. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. Father saw exactly who you chose to be. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not because it was loud or violent, but because it was delivered with such calm certainty, as if Richard were simply reading facts from a ledger." Margaret nodded slightly, her expression sympathetic in a way that felt worse than anger. "The attorney will contact you about the trust fund details," she said gently. "It's substantial, Daniel. You'll be comfortable. But the house, the land, the business holdings, those stay with the family, with the people who stayed." I looked around the room one more time. At the bookshelves Father had built himself, filled with first editions he'd collected over a lifetime. At the portrait of our grandparents above the fireplace, their faces stern and dignified in the style of their era. At the Persian rug Mother had bought on their 20th anniversary, its colors still rich despite decades of footsteps. Every object held a memory, a story, a piece of the life I'd thought was partly mine. "I need to get some things from upstairs," I said. "My old room, there are boxes, some books, photographs." "Of course," Uncle Vincent said quickly, too quickly. "Take whatever's personally yours. We're not trying to be unreasonable." But they were already moving. Richard toward Father's study, Margaret toward the kitchen, Uncle Vincent back to his position by the window. Dismissed, erased, as if I were already a ghost haunting a house that no longer knew my name. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the banister Father had carved with his own hands when I was a child. Each step creaked in a familiar pattern, a song I'd known so well I could have walked it blindfolded. At the landing, I paused. To the left was my old room, the one they expected me to enter. To the right was Father's bedroom, and beyond that, his private study, the inner sanctum where he'd spent his final years managing the empire he'd built from nothing. The door to his study was closed, but not locked. I stood there for a long moment listening to the muted voices drifting up from downstairs. Then I turned the handle and stepped inside. The room smelled of leather and old paper, and the specific brand of pipe tobacco Father had special ordered from a shop in London. His desk sat exactly as he'd left it, papers still scattered across its surface. A fountain pen lying uncapped as if he'd just set it down and would return any moment. The walls were lined with photographs, business achievements, family moments, the visual record of a life fully lived. And there, behind his desk, partially hidden by a heavy curtain, was the safe. I'd known about it since I was 12, had watched him open it countless times over the years. He'd never told me the combination, but I'd been a curious child, good with numbers, patient enough to watch and remember. It was the kind of thing a son might do, memorizing his father's secrets not to betray them but to feel closer to the man who seemed to contain multitudes. My hands were steady as I pulled back the curtain and knelt before the safe. The combination lock was old-fashioned, mechanical, requiring a delicate touch. I spun it slowly, feeling for the subtle clicks that indicated each number falling into place. Right to 34, left to 12, right to 61. The numbers of my birthday. March 4th, 1961, the year Father had started his company. The lock released with a soft sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Inside, the safe was organized with Father's characteristic precision, legal documents in labeled folders, velvet boxes containing Mother's jewelry, stacks of bonds and stock certificates, and there, in the back, a manila envelope marked with a single word in Father's distinctive handwriting, Will, Original. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled it out. Below it was another envelope, this one marked Will Revised, and beneath that, a third, Letter to Daniel, to be opened in the event of my death. I heard footsteps on the stairs, Richard's voice calling out, "Daniel, you almost done up there?" I grabbed all three envelopes and stood, my mind racing. The letter felt heavy in my hands, weighted with words I'd never heard, explanations I'd never been given. Through the study window I could see the oak tree again, its branches bare in the late autumn light, waiting for spring that might never come. "Just a few more minutes?" I called back, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant, hollow, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. I sat down in Father's chair, the leather still holding the shape of his body, and opened the letter. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Father used for important correspondence. His handwriting covered both sides, each letter formed with the careful precision of a man who believed words mattered, that they should be crafted as deliberately as the buildings he'd constructed or the deals he'd negotiated. "My dear Daniel," it began, and I had to stop, close my eyes, breathe through the sudden tightness in my throat. 3 days ago, I'd stood at his graveside and watched them lower him into the ground. I'd thought that was goodbye. I hadn't known he'd left me this. One final conversation, words reaching across the boundary between life and death. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I suspect things have not unfolded as I intended. I know my brother Vincent. I know how persuasive he can be, how skilled at presenting his version of truth as the only truth. I know Richard has always sought his approval more than mine, and Margaret has always been too kind to see manipulation when it wears a friendly face. Buffer. My hands trembled slightly as I continued reading. Outside the study, I heard Margaret's voice calling up the stairs, something about needing to lock up soon, about the attorney coming tomorrow. But her voice seemed to come from very far away, from a different world than the one I was inhabiting now. I need you to understand something about family, son. It's not always the people who stay closest who love you most. Sometimes it's the ones who have the courage to build their own lives, to define their own values, who truly honor what a parent hopes to create. When you left to start your foundation, your mother cried, not from sadness, but from pride. She said, "He's brave enough to be himself." I didn't tell you that then. I should have. The words blurred on the page. I wiped my eyes roughly with the back of my hand, angry at myself for crying, for letting them see me vulnerable even in this private moment. But Father's voice continued in my head, as clear as if he were sitting across from me in his usual chair. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave me a year at most. I told no one except your mother's sister, Helen, who I swore to secrecy. I didn't want my final months defined by pity or by people positioning themselves for what would come after. I wanted to observe, to understand who my children really were when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I stopped breathing. 6 months ago, that would have been April, I'd called him on his birthday that month, talked for nearly an hour about the new community center we were opening in a neighborhood that had lost its only recreation facility to budget cuts. He'd asked detailed questions, seemed genuinely interested. There had been no hint of illness, no shadow of mortality in his voice. What I discovered both broke my heart and clarified everything. Richard came to me with a proposal, a development deal that would have demolished 3 blocks of low-income housing to build luxury condos. The profit margin was extraordinary. The human cost was irrelevant to him. When I refused, he went to Vincent, tried to convince him to pressure me, to make me see reason. Margaret supported him not from cruelty, but from a fundamental inability to see beyond the world she knows, the comfortable bubble of privilege she's never had to leave. The letter continued, each sentence a revelation that reshaped everything I'd believed about the past months. Father described conversations I'd never been part of, decisions made in rooms I'd never entered. He wrote about Vincent's growing influence, how his brother had always resented playing second to Father's success, how he'd spent years cultivating relationships with Richard and Margaret, positioning himself as the wise uncle, the practical voice of reason. Vincent has been pushing me to revise my will for the past year. He's been subtle about it. Questions about legacy, concerns about continuity, suggestions that perhaps the estate should go to those who've been truly committed to the family business. After my diagnosis, the pressure increased. He brought in attorneys, had documents prepared, made it seem like the logical, responsible thing to do. My chest felt tight. I looked at the 2 envelopes still sitting on the desk, the original will and the revised one. Father's words continued on the page before me. 3 weeks ago, I signed a revised will. Vincent and Richard were witnesses. Margaret was there, nodding along, believing she was helping secure the family's future. The revised will leaves everything to Richard and Margaret, with Vincent as executor. It provides you with a trust fund, comfortable but limited, designed to look generous while actually cutting you off from any real inheritance or control. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the study. Closer now. Richard's voice. "Daniel, seriously, we need to close up the house. But here's what they don't know." Father's letter continued, and I could almost hear the dry humor in his voice. The strategic mind that had built an empire from nothing. That will is invalid. I signed it under duress, a legal term that means I was coerced, that my judgment was compromised by illness and manipulation. I documented everything, recorded conversations, kept emails, built a case that any competent attorney would recognize immediately. My heart was pounding now, so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, in my temples, in the hollow of my throat. The original will, the one I created 5 years ago when your mother and I updated our estate plans, remains my true final testament. In it, the estate is divided equally among my 3 children, with specific provisions. Richard receives the business holdings, because despite his flaws, he has the mind for it. Margaret receives the properties and the charitable foundation here, because she genuinely cares about this community. And you, Daniel, receive this house, the land it sits on, and controlling interest in a trust I established specifically to fund work like yours. Community development, social infrastructure, the kind of projects that build real legacy. The study door opened. Richard stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from annoyance to alarm as he saw me sitting at Father's desk. The safe open, envelopes spread before me. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp, accusatory. "That's safe. You have no right." I looked up at him and something in my face must have stopped him mid-sentence. Behind him, Margaret appeared, her hand flying to her mouth. Uncle Vincent pushed past them both, his eyes locked on the papers in my hands. "Daniel," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Whatever you think you found, the original will," I said quietly. My voice was steady now, calm in a way that surprised me. "Dated 5 years ago, signed, witnessed, notarized, and a letter explaining exactly why the revised will you all witnessed 3 weeks ago is legally invalid." The silence that followed was absolute. Through it, I could hear the old house settling around us, wood contracting in the cooling evening air, pipes humming with water, all the small sounds of a structure that had stood for 6 decades and would stand for 6 more. Richard's face had gone pale. "That's not..." Father changed his mind. He understood that you'd abandoned the family, that he was dying. I interrupted, still sitting in Father's chair, the letter held loosely in my hands. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago. He told no one because he wanted to see who you really were when you thought he wasn't watching. Margaret made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Uncle Vincent's expression had frozen into something hard and calculating, the mask finally slipping to reveal what had always been underneath. "You can't prove any of that," Vincent said. "The revised will is properly executed, properly witnessed. Whatever that letter says is admissible evidence of testamentary capacity and undue influence," I finished, "along with the recordings he made of your conversations, the emails he saved, the medical records he kept sealed until after his death." I stood slowly, gathering the envelopes. Father was a careful man. He built his empire by understanding people, by anticipating their moves, by always being 3 steps ahead. I walked toward the door and they parted before me like water around a stone. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. "The attorney is coming tomorrow, you said?" I looked at each of them in turn. "Good, I'll be here. We can review both wills together. Let him explain which one is legally binding. And then we can discuss what Father actually wanted. Not what you convinced yourselves he wanted, but what he took the time to document, to protect, to ensure would survive, even after he was gone." The oak tree outside was barely visible now in the gathering darkness, its branches black against a sky turning deep purple. But I knew it was there, roots deep, standing strong, exactly as Father had intended. I walked down the stairs with the envelopes tucked under my arm, each step deliberate, measured. Behind me I could hear urgent whispers, Richard's voice low and angry, Uncle Vincent's responses clipped and strategic, Margaret's softer tones trying to mediate, to understand, to make sense of a situation that had shifted beneath her feet like sand. The front hallway felt different now. The grandfather clock Father had restored himself ticked steadily in the corner, its brass pendulum catching the light from the chandelier Mother had insisted on installing despite Father's protests about extravagance. Every object in this house had a story, a history of decisions made and compromises reached, of love expressed through the careful curation of a life. I set the envelopes on the entry table, the antique piece Father had bought at an estate sale 40 years ago, before Richard was born, when it was just him and Mother building something from nothing. The wood was dark with age, polished by decades of hands setting down keys and mail and the small debris of daily living. "We should talk about this," Uncle Vincent said from the top of the stairs. His voice had shifted, become reasonable, almost gentle. "Daniel, I understand you're upset. Finding that letter must have been shocking. But you have to understand your father was ill. He wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. The revised will represents his true wishes, made when he was lucid, surrounded by family who loved him." I turned to look up at him. He stood with one hand on the banister, his posture open, his expression concerned. It was a masterful performance. The caring uncle, the voice of reason, the man trying to hold a fractured family together. If I hadn't just read Father's letter, if I didn't know what I now knew, I might have believed him. "He recorded your conversations," I said simply. "Every meeting where you pressured him to change the will, every suggestion that I was ungrateful, that I'd abandoned the family, that Richard and Margaret deserved everything because they'd stayed. He documented it all. Vincent's expression flickered, just for a moment. A crack in the facade. Then it smoothed over again. But I'd seen it. The calculation, the reassessment. Recordings can be misinterpreted, he said, taken out of context. Your father and I had many conversations over the years. We didn't always agree, but everything I did was in his best interest, in the family's best interest. In your best interest, I corrected quietly. As executor of the revised will, you would have controlled everything, managed the estate, made decisions about distributions, positioned yourself as the patriarch father never let you be. The words hung in the air between us. Behind Vincent, Richard appeared, his face flushed with anger or shame or some combination of both. Margaret stood further back, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "This is insane," Richard said, his voice rough. "You show up here with some letter, some conspiracy theory about Dad being manipulated, and we're supposed to just accept it? You've been gone for years, Daniel. Years. You don't know what it was like managing everything, keeping the business running, taking care of him when he got sick. He wasn't sick when you started pressuring him," I interrupted. "The revised will is dated 3 weeks ago, but Father's letter describes conversations from months before that. Conversations where you proposed demolishing low-income housing for luxury condos, where you went to Vincent when Father said no, tried to build a coalition to overrule him." Richard's face went pale. "That was business. A legitimate development opportunity. Father was being sentimental, letting his judgment be clouded by caring about people who couldn't fight back," I finished. "By remembering where he came from, by believing that wealth came with responsibility." The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. Through the window beside the front door, I could see car headlights passing on the street beyond our gate, people going about their evening routines, unaware of the small drama unfolding in this house that had stood witness to so many family moments, both joyful and painful. Margaret finally moved, descending the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the banister the way she'd done since childhood. When she reached the bottom, she looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Did he really have cancer?" Her voice was barely a whisper. 6 months and he never told us? I pulled out Father's letter again, found the section, read it aloud. "I told no one except your mother's sister, Helen, who I swore to secrecy. I didn't want my final months defined by pity or by people positioning themselves for what would come after." "That's not fair," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "We loved him. We would have what?" I asked gently. "Taken care of him? Been there for him? Or would you have done exactly what you did anyway? Supported Richard's business proposals, listened to Vincent's advice, convinced yourselves that cutting me out was the right thing to do?" She flinched as if I'd struck her. "We thought we were doing what he wanted," Vincent said. "Vincent said what Vincent needed you to believe," I interrupted. "And you believed it because it was easier than questioning, easier than examining your own motives, easier than admitting that maybe you'd stopped seeing me as a brother and started seeing me as an obstacle." Uncle Vincent had descended the stairs now, positioning himself between Margaret and me, protective or controlling or both. "This is exactly the kind of divisive rhetoric that destroys families," he said. "Your father wouldn't want this, Daniel. He wouldn't want you turning brother against sister, creating suspicion and resentment. He created a detailed legal record specifically to prevent you from rewriting history," I said. "He knew exactly what would happen after he died. He predicted every move you'd make, and he left me the tools to stop it." I picked up the envelopes again, held them so everyone could see. "Tomorrow the attorney comes. We'll present both wills. We'll review Father's letter, his medical records, whatever other evidence he left. And then we'll let the law decide what happens next." "And if the original will stand?" Richard asked. His voice had lost its earlier anger, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "If you get the house, the land, the trust, what then? You'll kick us out? Take everything?" I looked at him for a long moment. This brother I'd grown up with, fought with, loved despite everything. "The original will divides things equally," I said. "You get the business. Margaret gets the properties and the local foundation. I get this house and the community development trust. Father designed it so we'd each have what we were best suited to manage, what we actually cared about." "But you'd have controlling interest," Vincent said quickly. "The trust gives you voting rights on major estate decisions. You'd have power over making sure Father's real wishes are honored," I finished. over preventing the estate from being used to demolish affordable housing or fund projects that prioritize profit over people, over protecting the legacy he actually wanted to leave. The grandfather clock chimed the hour, 8 deep, resonant notes that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The house lights reflected in the windows, turning them into mirrors that showed us back to ourselves. A family fractured, standing in the home that had held us together for so long, trying to understand how we'd arrived at this moment. Margaret sank onto the bottom step, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Richard stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides. Uncle Vincent's expression had hardened into something cold and calculating, the mask finally abandoned. "You'll regret this," Vincent said quietly. "Fighting family, dragging everything through legal proceedings, destroying relationships that can never be repaired. Is that really what you want? Is your pride worth that much?" I thought about Father's letter, still warm in my hands, about the oak tree outside planted the year I was born, about 12 years of building community centers, of creating spaces where people could gather and grow and become more than their circumstances allowed, about the moment Father had stood beside me at that first ribbon cutting, his hand on my shoulder, his voice saying words I'd held on to through every difficult year. "I'm proud of you, son. This isn't about pride," I said. "It's about truth, about honoring someone who took the time, even while dying, to make sure his real wishes would survive, about refusing to let his memory be rewritten by people who saw him as an obstacle to their own ambitions." I moved toward the door, then paused with my hand on the knob. "I'm staying tonight in my room, the one you told me to clear out. Tomorrow, when the attorney comes, we'll settle this properly. Until then, I suggest you all think very carefully about what Father would actually want. Not what you've convinced yourselves he wanted, but what he took the time to document, to protect, to ensure would outlast him." I climbed the stairs past them, past their shocked faces and whispered protests, past Uncle Vincent's cold stare, and Margaret's tears, and Richard's impotent anger. My old room was at the end of the hall, the door still marked with the wooden nameplate Father had carved when I was 6, Daniel's room in his careful, precise lettering. Inside, everything was as I'd left it years ago. The bed with its blue quilt Mother had made, the bookshelf filled with childhood favorites and college textbooks, the desk where I'd done homework and written college applications and drafted the first proposal for my foundation, the window that looked out over the garden and the oak tree beyond. I sat on the bed and opened Father's letter again, reading it through completely this time, absorbing every word, every carefully constructed sentence. Near the end, there was a section I'd skipped in my first rushed reading. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then my plan has worked. You've found the original will. You understand what happened. Now comes the hard part, not winning the legal battle, but deciding what to do with victory. You could use this to punish Richard and Margaret, to exclude them the way they tried to exclude you. You could let anger and hurt guide your decisions. But I hope you won't. I hope you'll remember that family is complicated, that people make mistakes, that love and manipulation can coexist in the same heart. I divided the estate the way I did because I believed each of you had something valuable to offer, some piece of the legacy I wanted to leave. Don't let Vincent's poison destroy that. Don't let this moment define you as anything less than the man I know you to be. Generous, principled, capable of forgiveness even when it's hard." I folded the letter carefully and set it on the nightstand. Through the window I could see stars emerging in the clear night sky, distant and cold and beautiful. Somewhere below, my family was regrouping, strategizing, trying to figure out their next move. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and legal arguments and the slow machinery of justice grinding toward resolution. But tonight, in this room where I'd grown up, surrounded by the accumulated debris of a childhood and adolescence spent in this house, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not vindication, but a deep, aching sadness for everything we'd lost, for the family we might have been if we'd chosen differently, if we'd loved better, if we'd been brave enough to be honest with each other before death forced the truth into the light. The oak tree stood silent in the darkness, its branches bare, waiting for spring. I woke to pale morning light filtering through the curtains, the kind of gray dawn that comes in late autumn when the world seems suspended between seasons. For a moment, I forgot where I was, forgot everything that had happened. Then I saw the wooden nameplate on the door, Father's careful carving spelling out my name. And it all came rushing back. The funeral, the confrontation, the letter, the safe. I dressed slowly, deliberately, choosing clothes that felt like armor. Dark slacks, a pressed shirt, the watch Father had given me when I graduated college. In the mirror above my old dresser, I looked older than I remembered. Lines around my eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. Gray threading through my hair at the temples. 38 years old, and I felt ancient. Downstairs, the house was silent. No smell of coffee brewing, no sound of movement in the kitchen. The grandfather clock showed 6:30, too early for the attorney, but I hadn't been able to sleep past dawn. I made my way to the kitchen, Father's letter and the 2 wills tucked into a leather portfolio I'd found in his study. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the casseroles neighbors had brought after the funeral, that peculiar mix of sympathy and obligation that manifests in covered dishes and whispered condolences. I started coffee in the machine Father had insisted on buying despite Mother's protests. That instant was perfectly fine. "Life's too short for bad coffee," he'd said, and she'd laughed and kissed his cheek and let him have his way. I was standing at the window, watching the oak tree emerge from the morning mist, when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Margaret appeared in the doorway, still in her robe, her face puffy from crying or lack of sleep or both. "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly. "Kept thinking about what you said, about Dad being sick and not telling us." I poured her a cup of coffee without asking, added cream the way she'd always taken it. She accepted it with a small nod, wrapped her hands around the mug as if trying to absorb its warmth. "Why didn't he tell us?" Her voice was small, hurt. "We would have been there for him, we would have." "Would you?" I asked, not unkindly. Or would Richard have seen it as an opportunity to push harder for his development deals? Would Vincent have increased the pressure to revise the will? Would you have been able to separate caring for him from positioning yourself for what came after? She flinched but didn't argue. We stood in silence for a moment. 2 siblings who'd grown up in this kitchen, who'd eaten countless meals at that table, who'd shared a lifetime of small moments that had somehow led to this fractured present. "I didn't know," she said finally. "About Vincent manipulating things, about Richard's proposal to demolish those apartments. I thought we were doing what Dad wanted, what was best for the family. Best for the family you wanted," I said gently. "The one where I was the prodigal son who'd abandoned his responsibilities. It was easier to believe that story than to question whether you might be wrong." She set down her coffee cup, her hands shaking slightly. "The attorney is coming at 10. Vincent called him last night, told him there was a dispute about the will. He's bringing his own lawyer." "Of course he is." I wasn't surprised. Vincent had spent a lifetime building contingencies, protecting his interests, preparing for every possible challenge to his authority. "Richard is furious," Margaret continued. "He was up until 3 in the morning, going through Dad's files, trying to find something that would invalidate the original will. And Vincent," she paused, her expression troubled. "Vincent is different this morning. Calm, too calm, like he's already figured out his next move." I thought about Father's letter, about the recordings and emails he'd mentioned. Did Father keep a safe deposit box? Somewhere besides the safe in his study? Margaret nodded slowly. "At First National, downtown. He went there every few months, said it was for important documents." "Why?" "Because the evidence he mentioned in his letter, the recordings, the emails, the medical records, they're not in the house safe, which means they're somewhere Vincent can't access them, can't destroy them, can't use them to build his own narrative." Understanding dawned in Margaret's eyes. "The safe deposit box. But how would you access it? You'd need a key," I finished, "and authorization, which Father would have arranged if he wanted me to have access to whatever he stored there." I pulled out Father's letter again, read through it more carefully. Near the end, there was a line I'd glossed over last night. "Helen knows where everything is. Trust her. She loved your mother, and she understands what I'm trying to protect." "Aunt Helen," I said. "Mother's sister. Father said he told her about the cancer. Swore her to secrecy." Margaret's expression shifted. "She's been calling, since the funeral, asking to talk to you specifically. Vincent told her you'd left, that you didn't want to be contacted." Of course he had. Vincent had been controlling information, managing narratives, ensuring that anyone who might complicate his plans was kept at a distance. But he hadn't counted on me finding Father's letter, hadn't anticipated that Father would leave breadcrumbs leading to the truth. I checked my watch. 7 o'clock. Do you have Aunt Helen's number? Margaret pulled out her phone, scrolled through contacts, then hesitated. If I help you with this, if I go against Vincent and Richard, they'll see it as betrayal. The family will. The family is already broken, I said quietly. The question is whether we can put it back together in a way that honors what Father actually wanted, or whether we let Vincent's version of events become the official history. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Doubt giving way to determination, fear transforming into resolve. She handed me her phone. Aunt Helen answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert despite the early hour. Margaret, is everything all right? It's Daniel, I said. I found Father's letter, the one he left in the safe. He mentioned you. There was a long pause, then a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. Oh, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. Vincent kept saying you'd left, that you wanted nothing to do with the estate. I knew it was wrong. Knew your father wouldn't have wanted. She stopped, collected herself. You need to come to my house. This morning before the attorney arrives. I have things your father left with me. Things Vincent doesn't know about. What kind of things? Everything, she said simply. Recordings of every conversation he had with Vincent about the will. Emails from Richard pushing the development deal. Medical records documenting his diagnosis and treatment. And a video. He recorded it 2 weeks before he died when he knew the end was close. He wanted you to see it. Wanted you to understand exactly what happened and why. My throat tightened. Why didn't you come forward sooner? At the funeral or... Because your father made me promise to wait, she said. He knew Vincent would move quickly, would try to establish the revised will as legitimate before anyone could question it. He wanted you to find the letter first to understand the situation before you saw the rest of the evidence. He said you'd need context, that without it, the recordings and emails would just seem like family squabbles, not a pattern of manipulation. I looked at Margaret, who was watching me with wide eyes, trying to piece together what she was hearing. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I told Aunt Helen. And Margaret is coming with me. No, Helen said quickly. Just you. Your father was specific about that. He loved all his children, but he knew that Margaret and Richard had been influenced by Vincent, that they might not be ready to hear the truth. He wanted you to see everything first, to decide how to handle it. I met Margaret's eyes. She'd heard enough of the conversation to understand she was being excluded, and I saw hurt flash across her face, quickly followed by something else. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance that she'd made choices that had consequences. I'll tell her everything, I said into the phone, after I see what Father left, but she deserves to know the truth too. Another pause, then Helen sighed. Your father said you'd say that. Said you were too kind for your own good sometimes. All right, bring her. But Daniel, be prepared. What you're going to see, what you're going to hear, it's going to change how you see your family. There's no going back from this. There's already no going back, I said. That happened the moment they told me to leave. I ended the call and handed Margaret back her phone. She was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. He didn't trust me, she whispered. Dad, he didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. He loved you, I said. But love and trust aren't always the same thing. You made choices, Margaret. You listened to Vincent, supported Richard, convinced yourself that cutting me out was justified. Father saw that. He documented it. And now we have to decide what to do with that knowledge. She wiped her eyes roughly. I want to see it. Whatever Dad left with Aunt Helen. I want to see what he saw, understand what he understood. And then, she took a shaky breath. And then I want to make it right, however I can. We drove to Aunt Helen's house in silence, through streets still quiet in the early morning. The city was waking slowly, lights coming on in windows, a few early commuters heading to work, the world continuing its routine oblivious to the small dramas playing out in individual lives. Helen lived in a modest craftsman bungalow on the east side, the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors and looked out for each other. She was waiting on the porch when we arrived, a small woman in her 70s with mother's eyes and father's determined expression. You look like your mother, she said to me, pulling me into a fierce hug. She would be proud of you, of what you've built, what you've become. Then she turned to Margaret. And you look exhausted, come inside. We have a lot to go through and not much time. Her living room was cozy, filled with photographs and books and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. On the coffee table sat a cardboard box, sealed with tape and marked with Father's handwriting. For Daniel, to be opened only after my death. Helen handed me a letter opener. He brought this to me 6 weeks ago. Said if anything happened to him, if the revised will was presented as his true wishes, I was to give this to you. He made me promise not to open it, not to look inside. He said it was for you alone to decide what to do with. My hands were steady as I cut through the tape and opened the box. Inside were manila folders, each labeled and organized with Father's characteristic precision. Medical records documenting his cancer diagnosis and treatment. Printed emails between Richard and Vincent discussing strategies to pressure Father into changing the will. Transcripts of recorded conversations, each one dated and annotated with Father's notes in the margins. And at the bottom, a USB drive labeled simply, Final Statement. Helen gestured to the laptop open on her desk. He recorded it in my guest room. Didn't want to risk doing it at home where someone might find it. He was very weak by then, could barely sit up for more than 20 minutes at a time. But he was determined. Said it was important that you hear it in his own words. I plugged in the USB drive with trembling fingers. Margaret stood beside me, one hand pressed to her mouth. The video player opened and there was Father, sitting in a chair I recognized from Helen's guest room, wearing the cardigan Mother had knitted him years ago, looking thin and tired and utterly himself. "Hello, Daniel," his recorded voice said, and I had to close my eyes for a moment, breathe through the pain of hearing him again. "If you're watching this, then everything has unfolded as I predicted. Vincent has presented the revised will. You've been told to leave, and you found the letter I left in the safe, the one that led you here." On screen, Father shifted in his chair, wincing slightly with pain. "I need you to understand something. I don't blame Richard and Margaret for what they've done. They're not evil people. They're weak people, and weakness in the presence of someone like Vincent becomes a kind of complicity. He spent years cultivating their dependence, their trust, positioning himself as the wise advisor, the practical voice. And they've let him because it was easier than thinking for themselves, easier than questioning whether his advice served their interests or his own." Father leaned forward slightly, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "But you, Daniel, you've always been different. You left not because you didn't love us, but because you loved something more. The idea that privilege comes with responsibility, that wealth should serve more than just those who possess it. When you started your foundation, when you chose to build community centers instead of luxury developments, you became everything I hoped you'd be. And that terrified Vincent, because it exposed what he and Richard were becoming." The video continued, Father's voice growing softer but more intense. 3 months ago, Richard came to me with a proposal, a development deal worth $40 million. The profit margin was extraordinary, nearly 60%, but it required demolishing 3 blocks of affordable housing, displacing 200 families, most of them elderly or single parents. When I refused, Richard went to Vincent. Together, they began building a case that I was no longer competent to make business decisions, that my judgment was compromised by sentimentality. Margaret made a small sound beside me, her hand covering her mouth. On screen, Father paused, took a labored breath. "Vincent suggested I should update my will, make it reflect current realities. He brought in his own attorney, had documents prepared. The pressure was constant, subtle, but relentless. And I was dying, Daniel. Every day a little weaker, a little more tired, a little less able to fight. So I signed the revised will. I let them think they'd won, because I knew that if I resisted too obviously, if I made my opposition clear, Vincent would find a way to have me declared incompetent, to take control before I could protect what mattered." Father's eyes looked directly into the camera, and it felt like he was looking at me, seeing me across the boundary of death. So I built my case quietly. I recorded conversations. I saved emails. I documented everything with Helen's help. And I wrote 2 letters, one for you to find in the safe and one for the attorney who will handle my estate. In it, I detail exactly how the revised will was obtained through undue influence, how my signature was coerced, how Vincent manipulated my children against each other to serve his own ambitions. He shifted again, grimacing with pain. By the time you watch this, the attorney will have received my letter. He'll know that the revised will is invalid, that the original will represents my true wishes. But Daniel, and this is important, I don't want you to use this information to punish your brother and sister. They made mistakes. They let themselves be manipulated, but they're still your family. And family is complicated, messy, imperfect. The estate is divided to give each of you what you're best suited to manage. Richard gets the business because he has the mind for it, even if his values need work. Margaret gets the properties because she genuinely cares about this community. And you get the house and the Community Development Trust because you understand what I was really trying to build. Not just wealth, but legacy. Not just success, but meaning. The video was nearing its end. Father looked exhausted, his skin gray, his breathing labored, but his voice remained steady. Don't let Vincent destroy what we built. Don't let anger turn you into something you're not. Be the man I know you are. Generous, principled, capable of forgiveness even when it's hard. That's my final wish, son. Not that you win, but that you win with grace. Not that you claim what's yours, but that you use it to continue the work that mattered to both of us. Build your community centers. Help people who need help. And maybe, if you can find it in your heart, help your brother and sister become better than they've been. That would be the greatest legacy of all. The screen went black. The room was silent except for Margaret's quiet crying. I sat frozen, Father's words echoing in my head, his face still vivid behind my closed eyes. Aunt Helen spoke softly. The attorney has already received his letter. It arrived yesterday, sent from a law firm Father hired specifically for this purpose. By now he knows the revised will is invalid. The meeting this morning is really just a formality, a chance for Vincent to try one last time to control the narrative, to convince everyone that Father's original wishes should be ignored. I looked at the folders spread across the coffee table, the evidence Father had spent his final months gathering, the case he'd built to protect his true legacy. Then I looked at Margaret, her face streaked with tears, her expression devastated. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, Daniel, I didn't know it was like this. Vincent said Dad was getting confused, that he needed help making decisions. Richard said the development deal would create jobs, that the displaced families would be relocated to better housing. I believed them because it was easier than questioning, easier than admitting I might be wrong. I thought about Father's final words. Be capable of forgiveness even when it's hard. We need to go, I said, gathering the folders. The attorney will be at the house in less than an hour. Vincent will have his own lawyer, his own strategy. But we have something he doesn't. The truth. Documented and undeniable. Margaret stood, wiping her eyes. What do you want me to do? I looked at her. This sister I'd grown up with, who'd taken piano lessons in the room next to mine, who'd cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart, who'd somehow become a stranger over the years of distance and different choices. Tell the truth, I said simply. When the attorney asks what happened when Vincent tries to spin his version of events, just tell the truth. About what you knew, what you believed, what you were told. That's all Father wanted. Not perfection, just honesty. We drove back to the house in Margaret's car, the box of evidence on my lap, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds. The oak tree was fully visible now in the clear light, its bare branches reaching toward the sky like prayers or questions or both. Richard's car was already in the driveway, along with a black sedan I didn't recognize. Vincent's attorney, probably. Through the front window I could see movement, shadows of people gathering for the confrontation to come. Margaret parked but didn't immediately get out. Daniel, whatever happens in there, I'm sorry. For believing Vincent, for not questioning, for making you feel like you didn't belong in your own family. I'm sorry. I looked at her, saw genuine remorse in her eyes, genuine pain. Father said family is complicated, that people make mistakes, that love and manipulation can coexist in the same heart. I think he was right. Can you forgive me? I thought about the question, about everything that had happened, about the years of distance and the moment of crisis that had brought us to this point. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I'm willing to try. That's the best I can offer right now. She nodded, accepting the limitation, understanding that some things couldn't be fixed with apologies alone. Together we walked to the front door, carrying Father's evidence, his truth, his final gift to the family he'd loved despite everything. Inside, they were waiting. Richard standing by the fireplace, his posture defensive. Uncle Vincent seated in Father's chair, a calculated insult or perhaps just habit. And two men in suits, one I recognized as Father's longtime attorney, James Morrison, and another I didn't know, presumably Vincent's legal representation. Morrison stood when he saw me, relief visible on his face. Daniel, thank God. I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. I received a letter from your father, sent posthumously through another firm. It contained significant information about the circumstances surrounding the revised will. Vincent's expression remained calm, but I saw his hands tighten on the arms of the chair. James, I'm sure whatever letter you received can be explained. My brother was very ill toward the end. His judgment was documented as sound by 3 separate physicians. Morrison interrupted, pulling papers from his briefcase. I have medical evaluations conducted specifically to establish testamentary capacity. Your brother knew exactly what he was doing, Vincent, and he knew exactly what you were doing too. The other attorney, Vincent's man, stepped forward. My client disputes any suggestion of impropriety. The revised will was properly executed, properly witnessed. Any claims of undue influence would need to be substantiated with recordings of conversations where Vincent pressured a dying man to change his will. I set the box on the coffee table, began pulling out folders, with emails documenting a coordinated campaign to isolate me from family decisions, with medical records proving father was competent when he created the original will and coerced when he signed the revision. I pulled out the USB drive, held it up, or perhaps with a video statement father recorded 2 weeks before his death, specifically detailing how and why the revised will was obtained through manipulation. The room went silent. Vincent's calm facade finally cracked, his face flushing with anger or fear or both. Richard looked between us, confusion and dawning horror in his expression. That's not, Vincent started, but Morrison cut him off. I've reviewed everything your father sent me, Daniel. The evidence is overwhelming. The revised will is invalid. The original will stands as his true final testament. He turned to Vincent. You're welcome to contest this in court, but I should warn you, your brother documented everything. Every conversation, every email, every instance of pressure or manipulation. If this goes to trial, it won't just invalidate the revised will. It could result in criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. Vincent's attorney leaned close, whispered something urgent. Vincent's expression hardened, but he nodded slowly. I want to speak with my nephew, privately. No, Morrison said firmly. Any discussions happen here on record with witnesses present. Those are the terms. Vincent stood slowly, his calculated composure returning. Then let me be clear. Yes, I encouraged my brother to revise his will. Yes, I believed Daniel had forfeited his right to equal inheritance by abandoning the family. And yes, I thought Richard and Margaret, who had actually been present, who had actually contributed to the family business, deserved to inherit everything. I don't apologize for that. I don't apologize for protecting what we built. You mean what father built? I said quietly. What he built and you wanted to control. Control? Vincent's voice rose. I spent 40 years in your father's shadow. 40 years watching him make decisions, build an empire, receive all the credit while I did the actual work of managing, of organizing, of keeping everything running. And then you, he pointed at me, his hand shaking. You had the audacity to walk away from it all, to act like the family business, the family legacy, meant nothing. Like you were too good for it, too noble to dirty your hands with commerce. I built something that mattered, I said. Something that helped people who actually needed help. You built something with father's money, Vincent shouted. With the education he paid for, the connections he provided, the safety net he created. And then you judged us for continuing his work, for growing what he started, for actually honoring his legacy instead of running away from it. The words hung in the air, raw and honest, in a way that cut through all the careful manipulation, all the strategic positioning. For the first time, I saw Vincent clearly, not as a villain, but as a man who'd spent his life feeling overlooked, undervalued, waiting for recognition that never came. Father's legacy wasn't the business, I said quietly. It was the choice to use wealth responsibly, to remember where he came from, to build things that lasted beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. That's what I was honoring. That's what he wanted me to continue.